I spent most of my working life in Somerset and Dorset as an ecologist. I've worked for the government as one of their farm advisors on ecology in Somerset for English Nature as it was at the time. I've worked for Somerset County Council down on the Somerset Levels and Moors as their lead officer in that very wet patch. I've gone freelance. I've worked with the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. And my last work was with the RSPB up in Somerset as a farm conservation advisor down on the Somerset Levels as well. So I've spent most of my time working with people, trying to encourage them to make more space, particularly on their own land, for nature. And it's lovely to be here in Dorchester. I live down by the mill stream, and I've got to know the area over the last 4 years. I'm sure I don't know it as well as many of you, so if I get names wrong or places wrong, please forgive me. But technically, we have hitches. That's a bit beyond me, and it looks very different on this screen than it did on my own screen, so apologies if things get a little bit awry. But I've been given the task of talking about greening opportunities in a post-COVID Dorchester. So I will be mainly concentrating on greening of green space. So outdoor spaces, from public parks to private gardens, from road verges to odd corners, both loved and unloved. I'm not going to talk about greening opportunities regarding loft insulation, electric vehicles, solar panel, all that side of it. That's way beyond my knowledge. So I'm just concentrating on the green opportunities, which are perhaps most relevant to the society. And when I talk about opportunities, I'm particularly looking at the opportunities not only in terms of what we can do in a place, but also the opportunities of people. So it'd be places, nature, and people are the key opportunities I'll be looking at. I don't feel qualified to talk about a post-COVID Dorchester. We will all have our own opinions. The key point for me is, I think everything has changed. Everything is very different. I cannot see how we will return to a normal. Probably not in my lifetime, if ever. I think there's so much has changed. And the other thing I think is that in addition to the physical health that we've all been looking at, we also need to look at mental health. It's a hugely important part of it. The consequences are not just physical, they're mental as well. So those are the two personal messages I've taken away from it. You know, it's still going on. We're still learning from those. So to be able to explain now what post-COVID really is, I do struggle. So what I'll be looking at today is why the topic is considered to be important. What green does Dorchester already have? And we have remarkable green spaces around us. We are a remarkably green town in many respects, but that doesn't mean all the opportunities have been used up. It's still possible to do more. And we'll look at the opportunities mainly for people, for places and for nature, as I've said. It'd be lovely to hear your own views on the opportunities. You will know places that I don't, where you think there are opportunities to do more, to plant trees, to plant wildflowers, to change the management of areas. We'll look at who possibly might lead that work. Does it need a leader? Or can we all do it ourselves? And it would be good to have a conversation about what might happen next. So why is green space important today? I think the last 18 months in particular, we've recognized the importance of green space, particularly for physical and mental health. The opportunities for exercise during lockdown, it was very interesting to see. I look out over the mill stream and the way people were using the mill stream alongside the river there and other green spaces around town for the daily hour of exercise as it was then was quite remarkable. And to see how well some of those paths were used, how some of those green spaces were used, were quite striking in those days. It's widely recognized now that green space does allow us connections with nature and with people. The conversations that one can have just as you go past people inquiring, on their health, what they've seen today has been quite remarkable, I think. And the key thing about green space is it needs to be nearby if it's going to get well used. It needs to be accessible for all if it's going to be well used and appreciated. It's good if it's natural, but if it's not natural, that's fine. There are parts of Dorchester that are far more natural than others. They don't necessarily get used anymore, but people get different senses from those areas compared, for example, with some of our more organised parks like Borough Gardens. But above all, it stimulates the senses. You get very much more stimulation in many respects being outside. You pick up the seasons, you get change of scenery, sounds, and your pace can change out there. So it does encourage one to not be doing the same thing all the time because you have far more stimulation being outside. But it's not all about the health benefits. That's hugely important, but there are economic benefits as well. It's widely recognized that particularly trees are very good at helping improve air quality, improving local climate regulation. In Dorchester, it's been estimated that we have about 12% tree canopy cover across the town. The recommended level, from those people who are looking at it from a health point of view and a place point of view, is about 20%. Now, there's quite a few young trees coming on in Poundbury, which will increase the canopy cover, but we are still quite a way short of what the recommended future canopy cover in an urban area is. So it's just worth thinking about what that might look like in terms of the townscape and where more trees might go. Green space is also very important in helping to regulate water quality and particularly flooding. In Dorchester, we have the Froome past the town. The Froome is a chalk stream, and the UK has about 90% of the chalk streams in the world are in this country. So we have a special responsibility in looking after them. And the Froome is actually the most westerly of those. So the Froome, although it doesn't go through the middle of the town, it does go through the town area. And its floodplains, its functioning floodplains, are hugely important in terms of preventing flooding in town. It floods on the floodplains rather than flooding in town. So the function of the Froome and its floodplains is hugely important. And we've got to try and make sure in any opportunities that we make that connection between river and floodplain better if we can, and certainly don't try and interrupt it with buildings. Otherwise, those buildings will flood. Green space in town is quite often connected with business prosperity and with property prices. If you look at, on average, property prices in more green areas tend to be higher compared with those with less green, looking at the UK as a whole. So it does potentially, in the longer term, have an economic benefit in terms of both business and in terms of property. And the investment that is made quite often reaps benefit for those businesses, for the town, and for the individuals looking to change their properties. Personally, I think it also helps to give a collective sense of place and pride of place. That if you're in a town which is greener, that it is more comforting to be in that place, it's more stimulating to be in that place. So I think a greener town is more stimulating and encourages a pride of place compared with an area that is just bricks and mortar. That's just a personal. Last but not least, many of our councils, Dorchester Town, Dorset Council, have declared a climate and ecological emergency. Something to be taken very seriously. And just last month, we had the United Nations report on Code Red regarding climate change and the impact that we all face with that. It's something we all face collectively, and it's quite difficult to separate the climate emergency from the ecological emergency. But it's something that we need to consider. Our own reports, the UK's reports on the state of nature in our country, puts us 189th out of 218 countries. We are one of the most nature-deprived places in the world. And something needs to be done about it. If at all possible. That's just trying to give some of it in terms of the ecological emergency. And we need to have that in the background when we are looking at the opportunities as to why we need to do something. It's quite difficult to find a map of green spaces in Dorchester or anywhere, but this is the only one that I've come up that is comprehensive within the town as far as possible. And this is an Ordnance Survey. If you go onto the Ordnance Survey website, you can look at a layer on Ordnance Survey that shows all the green spaces through the UK. And this rather poor slide shows the green spaces in Dorchester. And they do public parks and gardens, public gardens. They do play areas, playing fields, sports fields, allotments, and religious grounds and cemeteries. So for the larger spaces within Dorchester, you can see that there is a fairly even distribution of those green spaces around the town. But I would add into that school grounds, they're green, employment land. Dorchester County Hospital, Dorset County Hospital has quite a lot of green space. County Hall has quite a lot of green space around it. I would add in informal open spaces, which aren't mapped, but people use them, people love them informally. Road and rail verges clearly aren't mapped. And there's many odd corners, large and small, around the town, which are valued as green spaces by those people in the area. And I would add in, although private gardens are obviously not public green spaces, they contribute to the whole green space within a town. But it also doesn't really give you any indication from this information who is involved in looking after them. So you've got public authorities looking after that, you've got schools looking after that, businesses and private individuals all looking after that green space. But it's quite a useful starting point, and I'm sorry it's not better on this screen than it was on my screen. So what do the opportunities we have regarding places? Start with public green spaces, and what are the opportunities within that? We can look at encouraging changing in the mowing regimes. The way in which I've seen the green spaces with the town managed over the last 2 summers has been very different from the 2 summers I've been here before that. The amount of mowing that seems to happen frequently changed dramatically, summer in 2020 and also in 2021. It's been picked up a bit in 2021, but because of the lockdowns, because of all the limitations in terms of workforce being able to mow places, there were quite a few areas which were left uncut last year and then cut quite late in the year. They picked it up again more recently, but it did strike, it was quite striking how that change came about. But some of it is planned. Dorchester has some remarkable areas, and it's quite often regarded as one of the leading authorities regarding the management, particularly of its road verges. And it's been managing its road verges for both safety in places and for nature in other places. And it's regarded as one of the leaders, certainly within England, in terms of the way it's been managing its road verges. Highly sensitive issue. Clearly, you've got to maintain safe verges around junctions, around signs and things like that. There are claims that our verges have become untidy. Some people have that view. Some people say they are absolutely fantastic for nature now. And it's a balance between that. That balance lies with the authority of Dorset Council but it's quite difficult for them to meet everybody's needs. But above all, they put safety first. Same with cemeteries. Dorset is blessed with 3 cemeteries which are enormously valued for nature. The Fordington Cemetery is a county wildlife site. The Municipal Cemetery on Weymouth Avenue is being put forward as a county wildlife site, and the new cemetery up at Poundbury is being developed in part as a perennial meadow, and gradually as the use of the cemetery expands, that area will be taken up. All 3 cemeteries are looked after by the town council, and they seem to have a remarkable way of getting the balance between the respect for it as a cemetery and allowing and encouraging access into that cemetery, but also fabulous for nature. They can do that because many of those cemeteries, particularly Fordington and the Municipal Cemetery on Weymouth Avenue, are on old chalk grasslands. So they have not been fertilized in living memory. So the grass there is very suitable for in part being cut and in part being uncut. And the way in which they do it, they will mow some areas and they will leave some areas unmown. They will mow around newly used areas, and they will let the older areas grow up a little bit stronger. But at the end of each year, it's all neat and tidy. And that's not bad for nature. That's absolutely fine for nature, because these are essentially old meadows that have been cut and have been grazed over the years. Perpetuating them, that kind of management in a modern day is a good thing. So in addition to just changing regimes, there is also active enhancement. So you can actually go and you can do planting of native trees and hedges. You can look at creating perennial meadows like they are up at the Great Field and they are at Poundbury Cemetery, and you can create wetlands like they will be doing off St George's Road as part of that new development down there. Turning to private gardens allotments, this is all about individual choice. You can do your planting for your bees. You can make holes in your boundaries for hedgehogs. You can put up bird boxes or bat boxes, but very much your individual choice. But the key thing is every little action you take in terms of adding to the green, particularly for nature, adds up to the whole of Dorchester. It makes a contribution to the whole. So don't feel that, you know, my little courtyard garden, I make it as green as I can. It's very small. It's a fraction of the size of this room, but I feel it adds up to something else within the area down by the mill stream. Planting for pollinators is very popular in terms of greening private gardens. And trees for bees is an idea that Transition Town Dorchester is doing, whereby we're trying to improve the network across the whole of the town for particularly early pollinators. We'll have blossom from trees through the early months, so that's kind of March, April, May. So that's an idea which is just starting out. But there are other odd corners around the town which are can be very useful. We call them filling stations, whereby just a few flowers can be hugely useful. If you look at the way pollinators work, particularly bees, they need to refuel themselves every 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, depending on the species itself. So you need these little filling stations for them, for the nectar which they use as energy, for the pollen which they take back to the hives. And we call them filling stations or stepping stones around the town. So every little corner helps. So, you know, the patch outside South Walk's house, which the Dorset Council now cut and collect, so they are improving the biodiversity of that. It might seem incongruous to have all those wildflowers in an urban area, but it's fabulous for the bees. And does it look attractive? I personally think it looks attractive, but it's not everyone. Some people think it should be mown as a play bowls on, but I think it looks quite attractive, and I think it's a lovely setting for the building, and a lovely demonstration of what can happen within an urban area. In some parts of the country, they do guerrilla gardening, which has been a movement perhaps for the last 20 years, whereby people tend to go out at dawn and dusk and they green up little corners that nobody else loves, usually with plants that are favourable to pollinators, but not always. Some people will put bedding plants out there, but they usually do it without permission or a little bit below the radar, hence the phrase guerrilla gardening. Very popular in some areas, big movement, particularly over in the States, but has really caught on in some places. Reading's got a big movement, and there's some parts of London that have got big movements as well. Another more recent one is postcode gardening, whereby, and I think this is a Friends of the Earth idea, is whereby you get together with a group and you garden within your postcode. So you will look after odd patches around the postcode. And there is a mantra, it's down the bottom of the slide. There's a mantra in greening, which is bigger, better, and more joined up. So the bigger you can make the green spaces, the better. The more you can do for nature, the more you can tackle the ecological emergency. Better is in terms of the care, putting more plants in, putting more nature-friendly plants in is a good one, and joining them up so you do get this corridor, so bees can move through, birds can move through, hedgehogs can move through an area, within an area. So you do think bigger, better, and more joined up, and that is where your individual action can actually be very useful, because by doing an individual garden, neighbour 2 doors down does the same, and you go through there, you do create these corridors. So you create a permeable urban area that the wildlife can move through. So the opportunities for people, that was about place. Opportunities for people is that we can change the way in which we do things. It's more in private gardens and allotments than in public open space, but there are some places where you get volunteer groups, friends of groups working with an authority on their public green spaces. It does happen, not so much in Dorchester, but it can happen in some areas. The main place where you can obviously change your own way that you do things are private gardens and allotments. And that really comes down to things like reducing the use of pesticides. It's not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about actually doing less. So reducing use of pesticides, herbicides, insecticides can be hugely important. It's one thing we could all possibly do if we have been using them, is to consider whether or not we really do need to use those, because essentially they are poisons that we put in to control something in particular, usually. But it's worth thinking about that. And then we could think about joining national campaigns. So No Mow May has been around for about 3 or 4 years. It's run by the charity Plant Life. But essentially, it's where you leave all or part of your lawn uncut for the month of May and see what comes up. And then you can go and count the number of flowers, and you can work out from that how many bees you've supported during the month of May. So there are national campaigns that we can join, as well as doing things individually within our own gardens. We can take practical action together. So this would be things like planting trees, weeding them. I was out last week mowing an area up outside the new fire station. Cutting and raking, all these kind of things can be done by volunteers together, either on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Likewise, Transition Town is currently trying to set up 2 tree nurseries in Dorchester, and that will involve harvesting seeds, propagating them, and then sharing out those trees. So there's a variety of things we can actually do together. But equally, not all of that about it is taking action. It's actually celebrating what we have as green space. So we can do much more engagement, walks, talks. There's another opportunity. Festivals. We've got the Urban Tree Festival, which is just had its 2nd year in May this year. We can get involved in citizen science projects like Every Flower Counts, so we can work out how many clovers we've got on our lawn, and we can work out how many bees we have fed with that. Opportunities in school grounds and projects, but very much about taking collective action and making connections both with nature and with people. And we can also express our views. We can lobby. We have that ability, and that is an opportunity that we all have if we want to see change. This is a group that was tree planting at Castle Field near Poundbury a month before lockdown, the first lockdown last year. And I was just then going to look at what the current activities are in Dorchester. You probably know most of these, but the town council is very much involved in greening the 3 cemeteries they look after, and they have a plan in place to look at the mowing regime on most of their open spaces. They changed it a little bit on Froome Terrace Green this year as a trial. So if you go and have a look at Froome Terrace Green down by the mill stream, you will see that they've left boundaries uncut, and they have left around trees uncut as well. So it's given a lovely different kind of flavour to it than it all being cut in one go. So they are looking at the way in which they manage their open spaces, particularly with nature in mind, as part of their response to the ecological emergency. Dorset Council, as we've said, significant changes in some of the way in which they've managed verges this year. Bridport Road, for example, they left uncut for quite a while, and then they came in with their cut and collect machine, which is a piece of it's a mowing machine where essentially they will cut and then they take all the cuttings away. Has 2 benefits. One is it's an efficient way of cutting long grass. And secondly, by removing the cuttings, you are reducing the fertility of the soil. So next year you will have a little bit less grass to collect. And if you do the same again the next year, you'll have a little bit less grass to collect again. And after about 3 to 5 years, you will have strikingly less grass to collect, but you will have more wildflowers out there. Because the grass really responds well if it's very full of nutrients. The wildflowers will respond well if there are less nutrients. And they say about 3 to 5 years, and you get striking different verges. And you can see them down somewhere like Buckingham Way, where they've been using this technique. It's gone from being a very grassy verge to being a flower-rich verge. Amongst the volunteers, we have Transition Town Dorchester, who look after the community farm and the heritage orchard. They have done a lot of tree planting work on the southwest side of Dorchester, on land owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. The last planting season, we planted over 2,000 hedge plants around a field at Castlefield. There's a charity called People Need Nature, which is Dorset-based, and they work with UCAN, which stands for the European Conservation Action Network, and they do a lot of work on the Duchy land. So if you go up to Middle Farm Way, you'll see that some of the verges there have been cut, some of the banks have been cut, and they've been cut up at the fire station, and they do a lot of work out on Greatfield as well. That's on informal open space and public open space, largely owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. And they're doing groundbreaking work in many respects in seeing how these areas can be managed in an urban setting by a mixture of skilled workforce working with volunteers. So quite an interesting setup. There's a Friends of the Riverside Nature Reserve who help to look after the riverside down by the mill stream, and there's talk as to whether or not they would be able to do any more work down by the mill stream. Dorset Museum, they look after All Saints Wildlife Garden, which they rent from the council, and they are also working with schools more and more, and part of the major refurbishment of the museum included them taking on an urban nature project alongside the Natural History Museum, which has a fabulous new urban nature area outside it. So there will probably be much more work with schools on urban nature in that area. So I'm just going to run through a couple of examples. Terribly poor map, I'm afraid. But this is the area of what we call Castle Field. So it lies between Middle Farm Way in Poundbury or Holmead Walk in Poundbury down to, so that is up there, and it goes down to Maiden Castle Road, down there. And it's essentially, it's all that space through there, not the rugby ground, all that kind of space up through there. 2 arable fields still in there, but it's down the bottom here is a mound where as I understand it, the spoil from phase 1 was tipped, Poundbury phase 1 was tipped, and there was a haul road all the way up through here, which is now used as an informal walk down by the... Describe that area. So this is the area we know as Castle Field. Castle Field, because that's the name that appears on the old tithe map. It lies between Middle Farm Way, up here in Poundbury, and Maiden Castle Road down here. It's got 2 arable fields in it, one at the bottom and one at the top here. And alongside the bypass, there is the old haul road for the spoil that came out of phase 1 of Poundbury. And it is along here that a lot of the hedge planting has been done, and where the bee orchids are now, alongside there. So there is plenty of opportunities there for hedge planting. We've probably done all the hedge planting that needs to be done out there, but now we'll be concentrating on managing the grassland, particularly for things like bee orchids in that area, which would be, again, mowing them and raking it off about this time of year. It's owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. But they seem to be quite willing to let Transition Town keep an eye on it. Very popular during the lockdowns. Well walked, particularly with dog walkers, and provides a lovely contrast to Greatfield, because this is informal and Greatfield is a little bit more formal. And this is where you go for your blackberries. Shouldn't have said that. But plenty of opportunities, you know, you do find people, because it's got benches there, you do find people stopping and chatting. And if ever we're doing work out there, quite often the passers-by will stop and give us a rest and have a 5-minute chat as to what we're doing, what they have seen. And it's a lovely way of making those informal connections that seems to work on both ways, both sides. Just a couple of pictures. This is on the left. Will you be able to see on the left? On the left, this is an area that has been tree planted in the past by Dorset cereals, and now is beginning to regenerate on its own naturally. So no more, we won't be doing any more tree planting. It's seeding itself, and people have made a lovely path through there. This is the follow-up to tree planting. You recognise yourself, Francis? This is a following up to tree planting. Tree planting is always very popular. Weeding the trees afterwards is much harder work and is much less popular, but it needs to be done. So this is us weeding a hedge that was planted 12 months ago. And on the right-hand side, I put this in because it's not all, nature does its own thing. This is a little corner of a very gravelly, very rough road verge by Roofing Gear at the business park there. No soil put down, but nature has just produced this fabulous crop of Viper's bugloss, which is actually humming with bees. So it doesn't all need to be manicured or organized. Nature will do quite a lot of the organizing itself. Another example, in Poundbury itself, if I show you the main spots, great field, this open space through here, well worth a visit. Very interesting to see how it's developing. Mixture of play area, cricket ground, and perennial meadows being created in there. Very interesting. We've also got the cemetery, which lies right adjacent to it, currently being used clearly, but in the bottom corner there is a wildflower meadow which is being used there as an interim, and lies adjacent to Greatfield itself. Fire Station Green, interesting, close to the Monkey Jump roundabout, the area in front of the fire station. Again, rough ground, now colonised with grass, but also you'll find there's colony of 50+ bee orchids have come in there. So now it's being managed. Now it's being managed for nature. What's going to happen up through Fordington Bottom? This area through here, owned by the Duchy, currently grazed by sheep. Some of it has been set aside from arable, but it is used as an informal walkway by members of the public who want to walk essentially all the way around through Poundbury Camp and back into the Great Field. Poundbury Camp, lovely area of mixture of rough grassland and grazed land and chalk downland in Poundbury Camp itself. And of course, we've got Westward Common that you can look down on, which is open access, common land, registered common land, and open access, and within Dorchester Parish. Again, substantially owned, with the exception of Westward Common, by the Duchy of Cornwall. So we're largely in their hands as to what can be done out there. But there's plenty of opportunities from verges, road banks, greens like Fire Station Green, the Great Field, that can be used. Over the next 5 to 10 years, while the Duchy is still involved in there, it will be interesting to see how they look at that area evolving over the future years. On the left here, we have meadows, which they look after, and are gradually being handed over to Dorset Council. This is the top of Bridport Road. Middle slide is Fire Station Green, as I call it. I'm sure it's got a proper name, but it's in front of the fire station, and it's where the colonies of bee orchids are. And this area was mown with a scythe just last week. So you can see how the management of the road verge is tidy along the edge, but you can let it grow longer. And the more in which this is cut and removed, as you can see, it's been raked up here, the more you'll get thin grasses there, finer grasses there, rather than the rank grasses. Poundbury Camp gives you the opportunity of looking over the Froome and the water meadows on Westward Common. Fabulous to go up there and see it in flood, because you can actually see the shape of the old water meadows down on Westward Common. Last example was down at the riverside. Very different, because it's really based on a linear feature down by the Froome and the mill stream. And it can connect essentially Westward Common down to the open spaces on Lubecker Way and Long Bridge. So there are a whole series of potential green spaces where volunteers potentially could get involved in that area, where there could be changes of management in that area. And interesting that this is largely within the hands of the Dorchester Town Council. So we've moved away from the Duchy area, and most of this, not all, but most of this is in the hands of Dorchester Town Council. So the Baroness Kitchen Garden is private, and the Old Swan Green is managed by Dorset Council, but most of that is within the opportunity of the Town Council to influence. So plenty of opportunities there. And the photographs show Millstream and the very popular walk down by the Millstream, by the allotments and Froome Terrace Green. Lovely atmospheric picture of Riverside, as it should be, early one morning. And on the right-hand side, Old Swan Green is one of the areas that wasn't cut early by the Dorset Council, wasn't cut regular, and ping, full of yarrow and wild carrot later in the year. So lovely to see that. They've now gone in there and they have mown that and they have collected everything else. So that will come again, fresh again next spring. So that gives you some idea of how it can look like if it's uncut. I think up until this summer, it was cut on a regular basis every 3 or 4 weeks, and you wouldn't have any of that colour. So to wrap up, what could happen next? What would you like to see in Dorchester? Are you interested in doing more individual actions within your own patches, in your own gardens, on your allotments? Would you like to get involved in national campaigns like No Mow May, as we've talked about, like pesticide-free towns, which is a national movement? Would you like more walks, talks, or events around the area, festivals? There is really quite a few that we try and promote with Transition Town Dorchester in terms of Dorchester Trees, Heritage Open Days, and all sorts of things like that. But would you like to see more or get more involved in events like that? Would you like more practical tasks to get involved in, more work days on a regular basis? Would you like to do collective action within a patch? We've got Friends of the Riverside as a volunteer group. Perhaps we should think about a Friends of Castlefield or a Friends of the Froome group. Depends what people would like to do. Well, how about a town-wide campaign? Froome visited Froome the other day, and they've got Wild About Froome as a campaign across the whole of Froome and their green spaces. That's led by the town council with lots of involvement of volunteers. So how about a Wild About Dorchester campaign? Quite a few places in Dorset have got green infrastructure plans. It's one over in the east, based on the Stour Park. There's one in Portland, based around the nature park in the Old Quarries. Lawton Valley Country Park, or Nature Park in Weymouth. Avon Heath Park, Moores Valley Park. Nothing in Dorchester. You look at the list of about 11 plans for green infrastructure for people and place and nature. They are in the east, they're in the south. Bridport's got one, nothing in Dorchester. Not sure why, but there isn't anything. Another question is who should lead it? Do we need a leader? Do we do it individually? Or would it be useful if someone stepped up, like the Civic Society, and said, would put our hand up for that? So I hope that's given you a whistle-stop tour of greening opportunities around the town. And I have a flip chart here in person, if you would like any ideas. And I'm sure they'll be putting them in chat online. But I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'm open to questions.